Congress passes a housing bill so big it gets 89 votes in the Senate. Republicans support it, Democrats support it. And one of the most controversial parts, it could ban large Wall Street investors from buying single-family homes. At the same time, the bill also tries to do something economists have been demanding for years, and that is to build more housing, a lot more. But here's the real question. Will this actually make housing more affordable, or is this just political theater around a much bigger problem? Today, we're breaking down the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, one of the most ambitious housing bills Congress has attempted in decades, what it does, why it passed with such overwhelming bipartisan support, and most importantly, what it could mean for buyers, sellers, renters, and investors across the country. But before we get into the bill itself, we need to understand how the housing shortage got this bad in the first place. To understand why Congress is suddenly focused on housing, we have to go back to 2008, when the housing market collapsed during the financial crisis. The entire home building industry slowed dramatically. Developers went bankrupt, bankers tightened lending, construction projects were canceled across the country. And for several years afterward, the United States simply stopped building enough homes. Before the financial crisis, housing construction generally kept pace with population growth. But after the crash, new housing starts fell sharply and stayed low for years. Even as the broader economy recovered, home building never fully returned to historical levels. At the same time, demand kept rising. The population continued growing. Households became smaller, meaning more homes were needed for the same number of people, and millions of millennials, the largest generation in American history, started reaching prime home buying age. The result was a structural shortage. Many economists now estimate that the US is short several million homes nationwide. In some regions, especially fast-growing metro areas, the shortage is even larger. And when demand grows faster than supply, prices rise. That's exactly what happened. Home prices doubled in many cities. Since the early 2010s, rents have surged across the country, and millions of households now spend more than 30% of their income on housing. A lot of places, a lot more than that. The threshold economists considered cost burden. For many families, housing has become the single largest expense in their monthly budget, which brings us to what buyers are experiencing today. Imagine a couple, Sarah and Mike, we'll call them. They've been renting for years and finally saved enough for a down payment. They start looking for a starter home, but when they enter the market, they run into the same problem over and over. Inventory is limited. Homes get multiple offers, and some buyers move much faster than traditional home buyers. Some pay cash, some waive inspections, and some of those buyers are institutional investors. Situations like this have been increasingly common, which is why housing affordability is now one of the biggest economic and political issues in the country. But here's where it gets more complicated, because this bill, it doesn't just try to increase supply, it also targets who's allowed to buy homes. The legislation is called the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. Despite the name, the core idea is it's straightforward. Lawmakers are trying to address housing affordability by combining several different policy approaches into one bill. The bill is actually a merger of two proposals, one from the Senate, one from the House, combined into a single compromise package. What makes this unusual is who's behind it. The two main architects, Republican Senator Tim Scott and Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren. Those two they rarely agree on economic policy, but housing has become such a widespread issue, both parties are under pressure to act. Republicans tend to focus on reducing regulation, and the Democrats tend to focus on affordability and corporate ownership. This bill attempts to combine both approaches, encouraging cities to build more housing, modernizing federal programs, and restricting certain institutional purchases. When Senate voted, it passed 89 to 10, which is extremely rare. And the bill, it still needs to move through the House, and parts of it could change, but the structure is already clear. At its core, the bill is based on a simple idea. When something becomes scarce and expensive, you build more of it. And housing, it's no exception. One of the biggest barriers to building housing in the US is local zoning. Cities control what can be built and where. Large areas, they're only zoned for single-family homes, which means developers can't build duplexes, townhomes, small apartment buildings. This type of housing is often called missing middle, and historically, it used to be common. But over time, zoning rules made it harder and harder to build. And that means that growing areas struggle to add enough housing. The bill tries to change that, not forcing cities, but incentivizing them. It includes about $200 million in housing innovation grants. Cities that allow more housing get access to funding. That could mean denser housing near transit, faster permitting, redeveloping underused land. For buyers like Sarah and Mike, this could eventually mean more homes on the market. But there's a catch. Housing takes time to build. Even if policies change today, it can take years for supply to show up. Which brings us to the most controversial part of the bill, institutional investors. Over the past decade, large investment firms have become major players in housing. After 2008, they started buying distressed homes in bulk, renovating them, and then turning them into rentals. Over time, some built portfolios of thousands of homes, and in certain markets, they became highly visible. And that visibility turned into political pressure. Critics argue they drive up prices and reduce inventory for buyers. Supporters argue they stabilize properties and expand rental supply. The bill takes a position. It places limits on large investors. Under the legislation, an institutional investor is defined as owning 350 or more homes. Those investors would generally be restricted from buying more. There are exceptions. Build-to-rent projects, major renovations, rent-to-own programs, but in many cases, there's a condition. The property must eventually be sold to an individual buyer within 7 years. The goal is simple. Shift inventory back towards homeowners. For buyers like Sarah and Mike, that could mean less competition. But economists are divided because institutional investors still represent a relatively small share of the total market, which brings us back to the central question. Will this actually work? Supporters say it could help, more housing over time, lower development barriers, less investor competition. But the critics say the impact may be limited. The shortage took more than a decade to build. Fixing it could take just as long. The most important decisions are still local, not federal. If cities don't allow more housing, this bill alone won't solve the problem. And for buyers like Sarah and Mike, the market today feels intense. Limited inventory, rising prices, multiple offers. This bill is Congress's attempt to respond to that, encourage construction, reduce barriers, and limit certain buyers. But whether it actually improves affordability, that depends on something Washington can't fully control. What cities and states do next. Because at the end of the day, the housing crisis comes down to one question. Will America start building enough homes again? And the answer to that question may shape the housing market for the next generation. If you like this video and want more information like this, make sure you subscribe and smash that like button.